My son still plays with this HackPack Domino Robot. Out of the two so far, it's certainly his favorite, but I think I can improve it. It only holds like 10 dominoes, but you see, I have a 3D printer and I'm itching to use it. Thankfully, 4-year-olds have very low expectations, so if I can add another 4 to 6 dominoes using my limited print volume and my P1S, I think I can call this a win. So follow along until the end, because this doesn't have a happy ending. And I think that's an important lesson for anyone, especially hobbyists like me. Before we start, now's a good time to tell you about PCBWay. If you need custom PCBs, CNC machining, or 3D printing, then PCBWay can help you out. They can take any size project, even small projects, and turn your ideas into something that can be shipped to your door. Check them out with a link in the description below. Any good improvement project starts with some reverse engineering, or maybe some basic measurements. To print a new domino sled, I first had to take apart the robot to get to the piece of wood I needed to start with. Fortunately, measure twice, cut once doesn't really apply here because we are about to go through a lot of iterations to get this thing right. After writing down what I thought was a good first attempt, I went to Autodesk Tinkercad, which is great for simple modeling. Yes, learning something better is on my to-do list, somewhere between an oil change for my wife's car and going grocery shopping. But it's on there somewhere. I'm undecided what one to learn, so please suggest one below. Seriously, I've done video game modeling and animation, but I've never touched anything for creating prints other than Tinkercad. Anyway, after printing, it turned out way off. Let's analyze what went right, remeasure our wrongs, adjust our model, do another print, and looks like we have another iteration to go. Now that we're lining up attempt 3, it looks pretty good. I'm able to reassemble the robot using our newly designed drop-in. Next step, we'll have to add and print the walls the dominoes rest between, because ultimately that's the part we're extending. We had to start with this piece because we'll be cutting a hole in the front and need to add some rigidity to do that. CrunchLabs provides the STL files for many of the plastic pieces, so we can download and import them into our modeling software. We need a few more measurements, like how far apart the wall should be and the size of the metal rod. I ended up buying a 2mm metal rod, but ultimately I had to make the holes just a little bigger. Could be a printer issue, could be a measurement issue, I don't know. If you don't want to deal with it, maybe 1.5 millimeters is a better idea. Just like the first object, we started to measure, guess, and check each iteration. This is where we start to run into support issues. The supports themselves are great and exactly where they need to be, but remember how complex the provided STL files are? Easy to print on their own if you rotate them the right way, but we're combining them into a larger piece where we have to decide the best of the worst orientation. Okay, so the first print completed, and yikes. It is hard to remove these supports. It legitimately took me about 30 minutes to pry it all away, leaving quite a pile, and looks like our measurements are still off, so we get to do it again. With that Bamboo Labs P1S came some purpose-made PLA support, so I want to try it. After updating our design, I added the white PLA support to the AMS, and you can see it looks a little better. Unfortunately, our print time went from something like 2 hours with slow printing PLA to 10 hours using 2 materials, so I decided to sleep on it. Back to it, these were easier to remove along the flat surfaces, but it was harder to remove them from the nooks and crannies. And while it probably wasn't harder to remove than our first attempt, I do not have the willpower to do this again. So, bailing on this print, I ordered PVA, which dissolves in water. So in this example, I printed the PVA where the support interfaces with the object and soaked it in water. I was able to easily pull away most parts except for the screw holes in the walls, which was the most difficult part of my previous examples anyway. Off camera, I got a drill out to help, but dang, we need another iteration. Finally, the last iteration we need, I can see the light already. I printed all supports in PVA this time, and it literally melted away in water. I thought this was so cool because I had no idea this stuff existed until a few days ago. For lack of a better way to describe it, I had to clean the booger residue off in a sink, but that was it. Some reassembly, And my camera died, but I was too focused to notice, so with a little movie magic, here's the completed 4th iteration. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So despite the PVA causing cosmetic imperfections and me breaking the rod support, it's good enough for a 4-year-old. Our rod support just need a little super glue, and this isn't anything a zip tie or some tape can't solve, so good enough. Maybe in a future video, I'll finalize the design and get PCBWay to print a 2-foot long version of this. But so far, this project isn't really going as planned. Finally, testing it, I noticed a lot more issues where I think this will turn into a failure instead of a success. First, I noticed that the badge holder thing that was sent is too short, so I get to order a longer one. Fine, these things are cheap. I loaded it with Dominoes and noticed that the warped printing, which only appeared with the PVA, would add extra friction to the Dominoes. They seem to slide okay for the most part, except at each end. And how did I solve this? Well, with another badge holder, of course. It's getting crowded back there. Well, the Dominoes usually move okay now, and occasionally that sound means the domino isn't completely seated in the dispensing red plastic thing that moves, and we have a very unhappy and unmovable servo. It'll jostle a little bit, so the second attempt usually works, but we have to manually add a domino. Finally, the last issue that made me call this project, since my son wanted to play with it some more, is the stop switch. I had to shrink the arm on the domino pusher sled thing so it'll pass by this here. Great, except now we can't reach the stop switch when we're all the way out of dominoes. Again, with my son begging for it back, I'm not about to say no to try to solve these issues for another 6 dominoes. The verdict, well, one thing I've learned is that failure is part of success. I thought about scrapping the video, never clicking upload, or bothering to edit at this point. However, every time I've succeeded with something, I've failed a dozen times. And while I never really watched Adventure Time,
sucking at something is the first step towards being sort of good at something.
You see these big YouTubers with big projects, and that isn't me. When they started, I guarantee they failed too. And I wish they would show it more. I think the most important thing for anyone looking up to them is to know that they iterated too, just like in this video.